Welcome to Gate City Insider. I'm Rosemary Plyben. Most of us are at least a little bit familiar with Greensboro's place in the history of the American Revolutionary War. General Nathanael Greene led about 4,500 American troops into battle against British General Lord Cornwallis and his force of about 2,500. A fierce fight with the British earning a slim victory, but leaving the British vulnerable, leading to a surrender at the Battle of Yorktown just a few months later. Many of us learned in school that that Battle of Guilford Courthouse was where America lost the battle but won the war. And today we can revisit our history at Guilford Courthouse National Military Park. Aaron LaRocca is superintendent of the park. He is here for a little walk through the park with us. Hello, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to be here. We got to have a walk through the park in the fall, and so now we're going to share a little bit of that with folks. Let's talk first a little bit about you, though, because I'm interested. What was your road to becoming a park superintendent?
I appreciate the question. So I've been a National Park Service employee for about 18 years. I actually started as a volunteer. I was a history student at George Mason University, and a park ranger volunteer coordinator sent out a recruitment email. I had no idea what I was going to do with my career. I said, oh, maybe I'll try volunteering for the National Park Service. It worked out. At the time, the Park Service had a hiring authority. I was able to get a temporary position, turned into a permanent position. From there, as a park ranger volunteer coordinator, getting to facilitate volunteer activities. It was one of my favorite times in my career, people giving of themselves, their time, their talent to help meet the mission of the National Park Service. Supervisory park ranger at Clara Barton National Historic Site in Glen Echo Park. All my time at the Park Service before coming to Greensboro was in a park outside of Washington, D.C. called the George Washington Memorial Parkway. My final assignment at the Parkway was I was the chief of staff supporting that superintendent with all our external facing responsibilities. I was the liaison to our nonprofit partners, congressional liaison, public information officer.
A lot of hats.
A lot, quite literally a lot of hats, yes.
And so how did you end up here?
This job was announced, and in the National Park Service, people compete for jobs, so I was lucky enough to do okay on the interview. And then from there, the position was offered to me, so I've been here for about almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in May of 2024.
Well, we're glad to have you. Had you, before you got involved as volunteering first with the parks, had you visited many national parks?
I grew up going to parks.
Okay,
yes.
Good. Yes,
so
it was a thing.
There's a program in national parks where you can get your passport stamp. Mm-hmm. And so my family grew up doing that, and I ended up working in some of those parks where I got my passport stamp.
That is cool.
So yeah, I got a passport stamp for Clara Barton National Historic Site in 1988. And then 20 years later, I was working there as a supervisory park ranger.
Did you have one for here then?
I did, for my first day on the job.
Yes,
first day on the job
you got it. You still have the passport?
I do, yes.
Oh,
it's our family book, so it has, nearly 40 years worth of visiting national parks.
That is a great story. I love that. Okay, let's go back a little bit further in history,
sure.
Past when you were a little boy.
Okay.
And talk about what Greensboro was like in the late 1700s.
So no Greensboro. Mm-hmm. So at the time of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, Guilford County was a new county within the state of North Carolina, and there was a small town, Martinsville, that was on a road. The road that we now call New Garden Road was known as Salisbury Road, and there was a courthouse there with a small hamlet of about 50 residents at the time of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, 8 miles from what is now present-day downtown Greensboro.
Okay, so it looked a little bit different.
You're saying. Bit different, for sure.
So set the stage for the battle just a little bit. What led to really this confrontation between General Greene and Cornwallis?
Sure. So this is the Southern campaign of the American Revolutionary War. Most people associate the Revolutionary War with the Northeast, but there was a Southern campaign primarily focused around Charleston, where the British Army, led by General Cornwallis, was seeking to gain support, supplies, resources for their war effort in an attempt to break apart the colonies, essentially to divide and conquer. So General George Washington sends General Nathanael Greene down to confront Cornwallis as part of the Southern campaign, and they, for lack of a better description, chase each other around the North Carolina and South Carolina countryside and have a number of conflicts, the most significant conflict being here outside of Greensboro, or present-day Greensboro, at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse.
Okay, and so what did that look like? What are some stories from that actual battle?
So the the main takeaway was this defense in depth strategy used by General Nathanael Greene. It was a strategy that the Continentals, or the Americans, had used early in the war to great success, and they used it here at Guilford Courthouse. It was Greene's idea to line up his most inexperienced troops in the front line. There was 3 lines, so the first line would have been the most experienced troops. The most well-trained troops, the regulars, would have been on that 3rd line. And what happens is the British essentially slam into these defensive positions, and because of the defensive positions, the Americans, the Continentals, are able to inflict a lot of casualties on the British. So the British push the Americans off the battlefield, but because of this defensive strategy, all those casualties, which then later leads to the surrender of General Cornwallis to General Washington at Yorktown.
You know, it's hard for us to kind of get a view or an idea of like what battles were like, and like how long did this last?
Oh yeah, it's about 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I mean, so it wasn't days and days.
That's
or
right,
months,
and it's a series of conflicts. So there's a number of conflicts as part of this southern campaign. That the Battle of Guilford Courthouse is just the largest. So people are familiar with Cowpens or Kings Mountain. Earlier in the war, there was a battle at Morris Creek, which is another National Park Service site, also located in North Carolina. So there were a number of conflicts within the Revolutionary War in North and South Carolina, but Battle of Guilford Courthouse was the definitive one of the Southern campaign.
Right. Okay, so immediately after the battle, immediately after the war, were there any efforts to kind of preserve or mark the area of this battle?
No, it's nearly forgotten about until 100 years later, when a man named Judge David Schenck comes to Greensboro and wants to essentially redeem the battlefield from oblivion. And so as a private citizen, he purchases the first land. He also starts a nonprofit organization called Guilford Battleground Company. It's a group of local leaders, and together they start to acquire the property that later becomes Guilford Courthouse National Military Park.
How did he even know where it was? I mean, how did he figure that out?
Yeah, so had to work with the people who, it was a farm site, that's one of the first, so he talked to that family, he engaged with the family, did his own research, did kind of excavations, what we would consider excavations, finding artifacts to kind of identify key areas of the battlefield.
So I mean, really, storytelling was such an important part of, finding the way and marking what had happened, because there hadn't been care to do that.
It wasn't marked, that's right, it wasn't preserved. Yep.
So when did it become part of the national park system?
So through the Guilford Battleground Company, they start engaging Congress, right? They first start engaging Congress for money for monuments and memorials in the park. And then in 1917, what we refer to as our enabling legislation is passed, and that enabling legislation does 3 things. It transfers the land that was originally owned by Guilford Battleground Company to the National Park Service. It designates Guilford Courthouse as a national military park. National parks can have multiple designations. People are familiar with seashores or parkways or national parks or recreation areas. Guilford Courthouse National Military Park is established by this law passed in 1917. It also gives future park managers the authority to acquire property that would have been part of this original battlefield.
Okay, so, and we talk about the original battlefield, and we think about where the park is today. It's not just that area, though, right?
No, it's a much smaller portion of that original battlefield.
Yeah.
So currently, the National Park Service manages about 250 acres of a 1,000-acre battlefield. So the battlefield would have stretched both north and south of the park, what is now into kind of the neighborhoods that surround the park, also into the cemetery that is shares a boundary with the park. So yeah, the park is much smaller than that original battlefield.
All right, so we're going to dive into this a lot more, like what the park is today, how people use it, how they've used it over the years, how they're using it today, what's ahead in the future. We're going to skip a little bit ahead to present day, leave the 1700s behind, find out exactly what's going on at the park right now, how you can be more a part of it, and how it can be part of the future of the park. That's coming up after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Gate City Insider. Today we're taking a short trip to Guilford Courthouse National Military Park for a much longer trip through history to our nation's very founding, in fact. Aaron LaRocca is the park superintendent. He is here with us today. Hello again. All right, let's talk a little bit. We talked about the history of the park, the land, how it's actually, what we mark as the park is a much smaller area than the actual battlefield that would have taken place in the 1700s. So how has, since it's become a park, how has it been used over the years? What has that looked like?
So the original intent of the people who first preserved the battlefield was to create a destination for a patriotic pilgrimage. It was the idea of the Guilford Battleground Company that people would come from all over North Carolina to see other North Carolina patriots. So they start to erect monuments and memorials to people who fought in the Battle of Guilford Courthouse or other battles related in North Carolina, other monuments and memorials to Revolutionary War and pre-Revolutionary War battles. They start to reinter people, so North Carolina patriots at the Battle of at
the battlefield.
At the battlefield,
park, yeah.
yes. For instance, 2 of the 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence from the state of North Carolina are currently buried at the park, right? So it's their idea that people would come to Guilford Courthouse National Military Park to reconnect with their patriotism.
And to learn about history, of course, yeah.
Yes.
So now, what has that evolved into? What does that look like now? I mean, that's still happening, I suppose, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So we encourage people to come and learn about the battle and the significance of the place and why it's preserved as part of the National Park Service for future generations. But it also serves as a destination for recreation, right? It's part of the green space landscape in the city of Greensboro. So people come to the park for their daily workout or to walk their dog in this place that's preserved because of its connection to the Revolutionary War.
Okay, let's talk about recreation for a minute. So what things are allowed, what's not allowed, and how much space is there, trails, paved walkways, all of that in the park?
So there's about 4 miles of paved, what we would call inner trails. They're referred to as inner trails because we have the tour road, which is a loop that people, and both on the inner trails and on the loop road, people walk. They ride their bikes. You're allowed to ride your bike on the tour road, not on the inner trails, and they walk their dogs. It's all about appropriate recreation. This is hollow ground. As I just said a minute ago, people are reinterred there, people are buried there, people lost their lives there. So it's about appropriate recreation. So you can go next door to Country Park for a zip line or a paddle boat experience, but you won't find that in Guilford Courthouse National Military Park.
Any other rules that you want visitors to be very aware of when they're using the park for recreational purposes?
All the rules are posted and listed, so I'd encourage you to do that research before you come. There are appropriate places for picnicking in the park. You can picnic at Hoskins Farmstead, which is historically operated as a farm, but it's all about appropriate recreation in what I would call the core area of the park.
Right, okay. So for those who want to really learn about the history, to visit, to see sacred spaces, how is the best way to explore and do that?
So for those who come Monday through Sunday, first stop, visitor center, right? Interact with a park ranger. There's nobody who knows more about that place, whether we're talking about the recreational opportunities available to visitors or the history, than the park rangers. They do a wonderful job. The park rangers, you can go through and get a brochure. That brochure has a park map. It'll talk about what kind of recreational opportunities, the map for the tour road and the other trails that are available to people. But it'll also give you some idea of the significance of the place. So that brochure is a great way to start to kind of introduce yourself to the park. There's also a lot of programs that we have called Junior Ranger programs, so for our younger visitors who want to come to the park, and they can earn a similar looking badge. It's not this badge, but a similar looking badge if you complete a number of activities in our Junior Ranger program. And we always offer maybe a great way to visit the park is using this. So through the National Park app, we offer a number of different kind of mobile experiences. You can take a driving tour, you can take a walking tour, you can take a monuments tour, all available on your phone. So if you don't want to use the brochure, you're there when the park visitor center is closed, you can experience it using your phone.
What are some places that are kind of off the beaten path that people maybe don't often stop by, but maybe would get a lot out of if they did?
So a lot of the recreational users use the tour road for their recreational activity. I think they like it because it's a little bit more open. It's a loop. You're not going to get lost, right? You know where you're going. But I love walking on the inner trails. It's almost like an oasis in an urban or suburban setting, right? Especially in the summertime when leaves are out, you can literally get lost out there. But one of the reasons I enjoy it so much is because you get a true sense of the topography of the park, and that topography really plays into the history to understand the defensive lines in the battle that unfolded there.
Yeah, you really have to think. You can also see a lot of wildlife.
That's right.
In the park.
I was walking in the park the other day. We had some pileated woodpeckers and a whole bunch of other neat birds and tree species to check out.
And I see deer just about every time I'm there, and they just watch you walk. They're so used to the people now walking by.
Yeah, I see them every day. I kind of wave to the deer family. Yes,
they're friends.
yes.
Yeah. All right, you might see some construction happening in the park. What's going on there?
So very exciting. Over the course of the last 18 months or so, the park has been awarded nearly $2 million in special project funds to undertake some special efforts in the park. The park's annual operating budget is $1.3 million. So to bring in $2 million just for construction projects is significant. So yes, later this year, we're going to start and kick off a trail rehabilitation project. So all those inner trails that I was referencing, the asphalt trails, they'll all be replaced in kind. As part of that project, we're going to improve the accessibility around the Greene Monument, which is kind of the core area of the park, and the visitor center. We've also brought in funds to rehab the Coble Barn, which is part of the Hoskins farm site. So yeah, we're very excited about some upcoming construction projects and the benefits to the visitors.
The reenactment is a really popular way to experience a battle, and explain what that is and why it doesn't actually happen in the National Military Park.
So that's right. The reenactment takes place next door at Country Park, and it is a reenactment of the battle that happened at Guilford Courthouse. Country Park actually sits in the footprint of that 1,000-acre battlefield. The National Park Service, as a policy across the National Park Service, does not allow for battle reenactments on National Park Service property because it's very challenging to actually recreate a battle. You can't recreate the horror, the loss, the fear, right? And so it is policy of the National Park Service to not host reenactments on National Park Service property. Okay,
so that happens in the spring in Country Park, and so people can find out more about that. If you want to get more involved, what are ways to support the park?
So shout out to the staff. There's 11 of us there who work extremely hard to ensure that our resources are preserved and protected for future generations, the mission of the National Park Service, and to provide access to this place and recreational opportunities. There's 11 of us. The mission of the Park Service is to preserve this place for future generations. So it's kind of daunting to think that 11 of us have to preserve this place in perpetuity. So we rely on co-stewardship. Right? Those people who give of themselves, the volunteers who help give programs or help with projects in the park, right? The people who have experiences in the park. You talk about your experience with the deer, right? That creates a connection. The goal of the National Park Service is to create connections for visitors so that you understand the value of this place, whether the value you assign to it is because of a Revolutionary War battle or because you like to walk your dog there. You have a connection to that place. That connection, in theory, helps you to steward that place, look after it. So that's our goal as the National Park Service, is to create opportunities for shared stewardship to preserve this place for future generations.
So along those lines, what is it you really hope people get out of a visit to the park?
Something that's for you. I want you to create a connection that makes that place meaningful for you. Whether that's a recreational opportunity, whether that's a deeper connection to the Patriots of North Carolina, to the battle, whatever that might be for you, why is this place important for you? If you can identify why that place is important for you, you'll help me preserve it for future. You'll help us preserve it for future generations.
Yeah, because it's on all of us.
It is on all of us.
Thank you. Okay, so we dove into the historic battle. We took a visit to the park today. Next, we're going to kind of look into the future, pull out the crystal ball a little bit, try to figure out what's going to be happening with that park and what it might look like for those future generations that we're working so hard to preserve it for. So stay with us. Welcome back to Gate City Insider. History, national pride, beautiful landscape, maybe just a place to burn calories. We have lots of reasons to visit Guilford Courthouse National Military Park. Superintendent LaRocca hopes that you will come for any reason, that any or all of those reasons, just to become a steward of the park. Hello again. Okay, so we talked about, before we talk about the future really of our hometown park, tell us a little bit more about the National Park Service. How do you work with cities, counties, community groups, volunteers? How do you all work together and make that work to, as you said, further the mission, become stewards of the park to keep it around for future generations?
Yeah, again, shout out to the staff. There's 11 of us responsible for preserving this place in perpetuity, so we really rely on this shared stewardship model. And in my time at Guilford Courthouse National Military Park, that shared stewardship model is strong. We talked about Guilford Battleground Company. That original Battleground Company kind of folded because there was no reason for them to exist. And
they reached their goal.
They reached their goal, but then in the 80s, another nonprofit using that same name was restarted. So there is currently the official nonprofit partner of Guilford Battleground National Military Park is GBC, Guilford Battleground Company. Okay. So it's a group of volunteers who help support the park in all kinds of different opportunities, whether that's facilitating special events around anniversary weekend, or we just recently had a shared success with a partner where we were able to procure a cannon. So there's a lot of different things that we work on with GBC to help preserve the park and create those opportunities for transformative experiences. But there's a number of other stakeholders too. We work closely with the daughters and sons of the American Revolution, people who have ancestral connection to the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. So those are important important partners.
Yeah,
and then the city has been a wonderful partner. Shout out to the leadership of the city of Greensboro and their engagement with the National Park Service and helping us to do some special events and programs. One that we hosted in the park last year was an attempt to elevate the story of the African American patriots of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Through the city's leadership, there's a bus that goes around the city, a GTA bus that identifies black patriots of the Revolutionary War, and you can see this flag on this bus. This is the flag of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. I love this as a symbol of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, because imagine as a militia person, you coming without any connection to the person standing in line next to you, all unified under this one symbol. So I think this serves as a beautiful symbol, modern day symbol that brings all these stakeholders together in support of the National Military Park.
I can't imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, are there many national parks that are right in the middle of a city like this one?
There are, but not that many in North Carolina. Right? And so, yes, that is unique. But a lot of people don't realize that, for instance, the National Mall is managed and run by the National Park Service. So, yes, that does happen, but it's unique for North Carolina.
Yeah, and so that has to present some interesting challenges as well. What are some of the things that are
I like to think of them as opportunities.
Opportunities, okay. Tell us about those opportunities.
Right, well, it's an opportunity for shared stewardship, right? We obviously have a lot of key stakeholders. We're in the same space. We have neighbors. Right, those neighbors are key stakeholders. They're users of the park, so we engage with them. So it's a challenge because we have shared boundaries, but it's an opportunity for us to help meet the mission of the Park Service, which is preserve this place for future generations.
We don't think about it as a growing park, but it actually is. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, originally it starts with 30 acres and we're up to 250 acres. That enabling legislation, 1917 Congress acts, it allows us to acquire all properties associated with the 1,000-acre battlefield. We were only up to 250 acres. So we continue to acquire properties when available to better preserve the landscape and present it to the public as you would have seen it in 1781 at the time of the battle.
Okay, so explain what that looks like. I mean, so we took a little walk right around kind of the boundaries of what is now the park, not of the battlefield by any stretch of the imagination. And there's some homes around there, but some of them, and some there were spaces where homes used to be, and now they are cleared. Talk about what's happened there and what's happening there.
So primarily in one section of the park adjacent to the Hoskins Farmstead. The National Park Service has been successful working with the local residents to acquire properties. So opposed to selling them on the open real estate market, they come to an agreement with either the nonprofit partner, GBC, Guilford Battleground Company, or with the National Park Service to transfer that property or sell that property to the federal government. And so we've been successful in acquiring a few properties. As you pointed out, we recently demoed one which really opened the landscape of that Hoskins farm site, which is key to the interpretation and education of understanding the battlefield, to see kind of this open landscape as it would have been in 1781. But then there's other neighbors who have agreed to a life estate. So once they move on from their home, to transfer that property to the National Park Service so that we can preserve it for future generations.
That is really exciting. So, I mean, really, it could look very, 100 years from now, likely this park looks a lot different than what we know it right now.
And we've been talking about shared stewardship, right? I mean,
That's what better example?
What better example of shared stewardship than working to preserve this for future generations?
And to bring it back to what it maybe was hundreds of years ago. There are also some studies and surveys happening that really will impact how we enjoy and use the park for decades to come, and people can kind of be a part of that. Can you tell us what that looks like and how that's happening?
So I'm a new superintendent to Guilford Courthouse National Military Park. So one of the first things I wanted to do was understand the existing management documents and the decisions that my predecessors had to make that, you know, influence my decision making moving forward. And so I went to one of those existing documents. It's known as the General Management Plan. This document was printed in 1997.
Oh, not too long ago.
Well, it depends on your perspective, fair enough. But I think, you know, I like to point out that in 1997, the park didn't look the same, and the city of Greensboro certainly didn't look the same.
Not even close.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So for my management and the park management decisions moving forward, this is not a useful decision-making tool. So over the course of the last year or so, we've engaged with planners from within the National Park Service, with the city, with the stakeholders that we had mentioned, to do something called a Development Concept Plan, a DCP, which will make management recommendations for all things from the treatment of our facilities, the management of our facilities, to visitor access and circulation, to the management of the cultural landscape. So it'll be kind of a refresh of this document, making management recommendations for the next 20 to 30 years. A
business plan, strategic plan, it's kind of all of that wrapped up into one if you worked on those before.
And then if I could, there will be an opportunity later this year for the public to provide feedback. It'll be the second opportunity for the public to provide feedback as part of this planning effort. We pushed out some concepts last summer. We took that feedback, tweaked the concepts, and then finalizing those ideas to push back out to the public for an additional round of public comment.
And we know that people are really interested, and especially people who live around there, work, use it to get around, whether walking, driving, biking.
Yes.
And so all of that's really important. We're going to have you back to talk with us once you kind of get those next recommendations. Yes, so that we can share that and you can get some good feedback from people. So stay tuned on that. When we just talk about the park and the space, what really excites you about the possibilities? Oh,
that's a great question. Thank you. I think the opportunities to create stewards, I've never been in a park where there's now bigger opportunity to create more stewards for this place. Working through our partners, looking at our recreational activities and allowing, for instance, additional picnicking in areas of the park to allow people to create those connections for shared stewardship. One of the things that we've been working hard under the leadership of a few key stakeholders and city leadership is to elevate the story of the Black patriots of the Revolutionary War. Right? 52% of the population of the city of Greensboro is Black and brown. Well, if we're not telling that story, we're not reaching those people who could also be stewards of this place, right? The goal here is to create that connection. So if we elevate that story, we're able to hopefully create that connection and create that next generation of stewards for the park.
And we're not telling the whole story either if we don't tell all the stories.
That's
That's for
correct,
sure. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We will visit with you soon and find out more about the upcoming plans. We should tell you the park grounds are accessible to visitors every single day of the year. The Visitors Center, if you want to get a head start on some of the history lessons, is open 9 to 5 Wednesdays through Sundays. The Battle Reenactment that happens annually March 16th and 17th in Country Park. So be sure to follow Greensboro Parks and Recreation for more information on that. And once again, thank you for spending some time with us. Thank you for the tour. I'll see you out there before too long.
All right, here's your stewardship
Oh,
flag.
thank you, thank you. I will keep that with keep this with pride. I appreciate that. That is our time today. Thank you for spending some of yours with us. For all of us here at Greensboro Television Network, have a great day.